There's no question that Netanyahu wishes for nothing else than for the entire world, and particularly for the United States, to be involved in a war against Israel. There's no question. I have little doubt that the attacks against Hezbollah, the attacks right now against all of Lebanon, is meant to provoke. Iran will do all that it can in order not to be involved in a war where it knows that not only will it be left alone, it'll actually be fought even by its closest neighbors, including Arab and Muslim states. But we must understand that someone like Trump has absolutely no ethics, has absolutely no moral compass, has absolutely no concern for humanitarian costs. He addresses things from a pure financial aspect. And this, as gruesome as it is, might be a catalyst towards this coming to some sort of conclusion.
Dr. Altikriti, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for being with us.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. It's an absolute pleasure.
You've played a significant role in various political movements, including the Stop the War coalition against the Iraq war, and you're a commentator on Middle Eastern affairs. Last week we saw quite an invasive military attack against Israel, whereby Iran fired over 200 hypersonic missiles into Tel Aviv. Do you think that Iran is the answer to ending the genocide in Gaza?
I don't. Not directly, at least. The genocide in Gaza now that's been going on for over a year is something that is within the whole project of Israel. I mean, we must understand that it didn't come by accident. It's not a coincidence that this happened. It's a long-riding dream and wish and aspiration, especially of the hawks or so-called hawks within Israeli society and politics, including Netanyahu and his generals, to absolutely wipe out Palestinian existence. They say to wipe out Palestinian resistance, but evidently that's not only what they're seeking. And for that matter, Iran's response or intervention is, in my view, no more than trying to maintain whatever's left of face, of standing, of reputation, because the kind of humiliation that not only Iran itself, but also its proxies, such as Hezbollah, such as some militias in Iraq, for instance, the way that they were attacked by Israel over the course of the past few weeks has determined it nigh on imperative that Iran responds in some way. Now, I obviously see that Iran's response is inevitable. I think that it's below or beneath the kind of threshold that would be seen as a full-blown response. Mm-hmm. Iran always maintains its right to respond in the manner at the time that it sees fit. I'm guessing that this isn't it, so we all wait to see what's going to happen. But in any case, I don't think that Iran will go all out and to risk two main elements in order to appear as though it has responded to the attacks that either Hezbollah or Iran has come under in recent times. Those two main elements is the Iranian nuclear project. That is of incredible strategic importance to Iran. And I have to say that I somewhat admire Iran's ability to be restrained in its response in order to protect a project that will definitely, if coming to fruition, will land it in a place where it has dominance in the entire region. Now, that's a prize which is worth taking a few slaps, if you wish, politically, and not responding directly or immediately or on par. The second issue is Iran's internal situation. The Iranian people are in no state to fight a war, especially a war against Israel. And a war against Israel, by the way, means by default, it's a war against America, it's a war against Europe, it's a war literally almost against the world. Now, Iran knows that it neither has the capacity in terms of its weapons or the technology or the such, nor does it, and this is where the internal comes, nor does it have the kind of solidity, of strength internally to be able to withstand such a war.
Does the Iranian strike signal an escalation in this conflict that is irredeemable? I mean, are we on the brink of another world war that will have the involvement of America and other powers in the region?
There's no question that Netanyahu wishes for nothing else than for the entire world, and particularly for the United States, to be involved in a war against Israel. There's no question. And I have little doubt that the attacks against Hezbollah, the attacks right now against all of Lebanon, all people of Lebanon, as well as probably the coming attacks on other areas surrounding what we call today Israel, is meant to provoke, is meant to drive this to a level of escalation where the United States can't stand back and simply observe, or just simply say that we've supplied weapons, or we've supplied ammunition, or we've supplied intelligence. They will have to get involved. That would be a dream come true for Netanyahu. So the possibility and the potential for this to become an all-out war is still there, obviously, because we're still having, the shellings of Beirut, the shellings of various areas in Lebanon, including the north of Lebanon, as well as the continued attacks on Gaza. So that possibility cannot be dismissed. However, my understanding of the region is that Iran will do all that it can in order not to be involved in a war where it knows that not only will it be left alone, it'll actually be fought even by its closest neighbors, including Arab and Muslim states.
Speaking of Iran, what does the Iranian regime signal in terms of a potential Sunni-Shia alliance into the future?
Sadly, Iran had the potential to act as a catalyst for some sort of, I wouldn't say unity, but some sort of alliance between various factions within the Muslim world. And there was a time when there was talk of a Turkish, Indonesian, Pakistani, Iranian alliance that would create that, at the time, called the Muslim NATO. This was several, maybe 25, 30 years ago. Unfortunately, the way that Iran pursued the past, particularly 15 years, has been nothing short of, I would call it criminal. What Iran has done and continues to do in Iraq is disgraceful. What Iran has done in Syria is absolutely obscene. And there's no question that, and by the way, I generally prefer to take it from an entirely political perspective. For instance, when we talk about Israel and its crime in Gaza, we take it from a political perspective. I don't engage much in the Jewishness of Israel. That doesn't concern me, because it's not the be-all and end-all. This is, probably part of the argument, but it's not the whole argument. But politically, Israel has committed to genocide as it has committed genocides in the past. Iran, what it assisted in doing in Iraq for now 22, 23 years, and in Syria now for nigh on 13 years, is no less criminal. And it continues, unfortunately, unabated, unapologetic, and therefore that kind of potential, or that kind of wish that we had one day of some sort of access, some sort of alliance, some sort of coming together of countries, of potential, of resource, whether it be humanitarian, agricultural, material, or otherwise, that has been absolutely banished. And unfortunately, if you were to look at countries such as Iraq, such as Syria, such as Lebanon, such as Yemen, specifically, and flout the possibility of Iran being an act of good, you'd find that would be dismissed quite rapidly.
Given that the pro-Iranians are seen as the only form of military resistance towards Israel at the moment, is this worthy of some sort of credit?
Absolutely. I think that one of the extremely vital elements of what's been happening over the course of the past year is what the Houthis did in the Red Sea, and the kind of disruption they caused to maritime traffic through the Strait of, through Bab el-Mandeb, and how that forced the hand of many Western countries into negotiating something, into accepting that there has to be a promotion of whatever talks there are in order to arrive at a ceasefire in Gaza. And obviously the fact that Hezbollah, from time to time, shelled Israeli positions, and in the past few weeks particularly, where Iran sent over drones from Iraq and from various other locations and disrupted Israeli defenses somehow. I think that that's something that we must mention and we must praise, especially in light of the absolute, abject, deafening silence on behalf of the majority of Arab countries who claim that their position is anti-Iran. If you were to observe the position that Iran and its proxies, whether it be in Yemen or in Lebanon, adopted and what they did, albeit probably in some estimations disappointing, beneath what we were hoping. But ultimately speaking, you have to say that in comparison to what most Arab countries did, and what they have in terms of their armors and their capacities and their proximity to Gaza, you have to say that that's something that they must be given credit for.
Now, one of their proxies is seen as Hezbollah. In your analysis and opinion, do you think Hezbollah will see its end now given the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah?
No, not their end. But I doubt that anyone would argue against Hezbollah being diminished in terms of its internal power, but more probably I would argue in its reputational standing. Hezbollah, in the context of Lebanon, was seen as the major power. I'm not entirely sure that that continues to stand. Hezbollah in the region was seen as a major potential for, the axis of resistance, as is known, and for it being a very important strategic backup for the Palestinians. I think that has been diminished to quite a large degree, and therefore what remains to be seen is what kind of role Hezbollah will be able to play in Lebanon first and foremost, where its actual base, but more so maybe as that strategic element that is seen to be within, what we call the axis of resistance. I think that's been diminished to a very, very large degree.
Given the context of what's happened recently, do you think that Israel is hesitant of continuing its ground invasion into Lebanon, although while still in Gaza at the same time?
Of course, and that, by the way, on a tactical, and I'm not by any means a military strategist or expert, but I am told, and I think it makes sense, that Hezbollah missed a huge opportunity at the very beginning of the Gaza war, yes, back in October 2023, when the vast majority of the IDF were focused and deployed around Gaza, and the north of Israel, bordering Lebanon, only had maybe 10% or 15% of the IDF. And that was the chance of Hezbollah if, as it constantly says, and as it constantly proclaims, it wanted to engage the Israeli IDF, the Israeli occupation. That was its chance. But having missed that chance and waited for an entire year almost, what has happened now is that there is now more Israeli military presence at the Lebanese borders. Now, I'm not entirely sure about the Israelis in there. I mean, the desire to invade is there, absolutely. But invading, a land invasion, is a serious military operation. Now, whether Israel wishes to do that, not absolutely sure or certain about the actual field backing of the United States and its allies in the West. I'm not entirely sure. It could, for a while, for a few days, probably even a few weeks, continue its shelling, continue its bombardment, try to weaken the resolve and the lines and the defenses of the Lebanese forces in their various guises, whether the actual army or whether Hezbollah and various other militant groups, and more importantly, the resolve of the Lebanese people. Should then that allow them the prospect of a land invasion? I'm not entirely sure, but it remains a possible scenario.
Speaking of other powers that are, operating and playing in the region, Donald Trump recently made a comment that Iran and Israel were behaving like two school children that were fighting. Do you think that a Donald Trump presidency would end the genocide in Gaza?
No, not directly. However, I have some hope, in assessing, because we're upon the elections. We're merely a month away from the November elections in America, and I do think that they are significant, especially in the current context and circumstances that we have right now. And what you get with Donald Trump is, farce on one side, but also you get something else, and that I believe is interesting and is also important, and that is he deals with these hefty political advents as a businessman. And sometimes that bears fruit. He addresses things from a pure financial aspect. He looks at relations as to how much he stands to gain, how much he stands to lose. He has said in the past that he considers wars as costly from the financial perspective. He's not much on the humanitarian side, by the way. And whilst that might be gruesome on many levels, but in practical terms, it may just cause some standback from America constantly piling in billions and billions and billions in aid of Israel. That might be. Now, we're here talking about probabilities and mights.
Yes.
But we must understand that someone like Trump has absolutely no ethics, has absolutely no moral compass, has absolutely no concern for humanitarian costs in whatever conflict.
Purely business.
Purely business. And this, as gruesome as it is, might be a catalyst towards this coming to some sort of conclusion.
Is there, in your opinion, a potential for an Islamic-Sunni sort of alliance amongst Arab and Muslim countries that could present, like a powerful force against Western hegemony?
I wish I could say yes. But unfortunately, if I'm being true to at least the principles of reading maps, what's in the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's for Allah to decide and decree.
No doubt.
But as far as the actual proponents of what we have today and the elements that we can read, I think that we're more approaching an actual conflict within that we call the Arab and Muslim world than we are seeing a building of some sort of coalition alliance. It's a very depressing state that we find, particularly the Arab world, but also the Muslim world generally speaking. We're talking about what is supposed to be major powers, such as Iran, such as Pakistan, such as Indonesia, such as Malaysia. Yet they are so apart in terms of their strategic vision, in terms of how they see the resolution of the current conflict, and particularly the issue of Palestine. We have, I have to say, when we look at the Arab world, we have far more important stuff to deal with. And high amongst that is political oppression. You can't build anything of real worth when political oppression is dominant, when you have hundreds of millions of people who can't think, who can't express, who can't mobilize, who can't speak of their emotions and feelings and affiliations or the like. When you have that, you really can't. And to rely on the regimes to build something, I think, is absolutely futile.
You played a tremendous role in organizing the Million Man March in the protest against the Iraq War. Seeing the historic protests that are happening all around the world, in support of Palestinian people, do you see these protests as a means of attaining victory for the Palestinian people?
What's happening around the world, the protests are the tip of the iceberg. because those protests, and they continue a year on, to churn out hundreds of thousands of people every single time in Britain alone, and then hundreds of thousands more across Europe. And the fact that these protests are happening despite media attacks, despite political clampdowns and threats, and despite actual persecutions against the demonstrators, people being sacked, people being arrested, people having criminal records, people being targeted and demonized and the such, is in itself something that speaks volumes of the global reaction to Gaza. What we've seen around the world is in my understanding of history before, when I was young or before I was born, and since, is absolutely unprecedented. I was one of the leaders of the 2 million march in February 2003 against the war in Iraq, and the movement then, and I was one of the organizers of the global day of protests around the world where 43 million people took part. But this is different. The people, my elders who attended the Vietnam anti-war protest that brought the war to an end, they tell me this is different.
What's so different about it?
There are several things that are different on the ground. And if I may use the term, the bestiality that was shown by what was supposed to be the only democracy in the region, the most moral army in the world, a people who had themselves and their forefathers suffered a horrendous genocide themselves 100 years ago, that they could commit this and continue to commit this and continue to commit this, despite the figures, despite the images, despite the devastation, despite the appeals from around the world. That in itself is something that I think makes it absolutely unique. But also the silence, in fact, the complicitness of what we call the international community, which calls itself democratic, which calls itself the bastions of human rights and freedoms. That this all of a sudden has led to citizens, natives of those countries, asking themselves, who on earth are we? What do we stand for? What do we believe in? What about the principles that we believed in? When the Americans, for instance, I sometimes crassly say that they believed the lie that they were free and tried to raise the Palestinian flag on university campuses, they saw for themselves what real and true, freedom means in America. For professors, for female senior staff members of universities being malhandled by the National Guard in front of cameras, leading many to say, hang on, if in front of all these cameras they deal with female professors in this particular way, what on earth did they do in Afghanistan and Iraq when there were no cameras to speak of? So all of a sudden we're having an entire shift in public perception and how this is being digested, how this is being consumed. But also there are, subhanAllah, by the grace of Allah, tools that were created by the international community, such as the social media platforms, such as means of communication and the such, that have led to people finding out for themselves what the truth is. For the very first time, and over the course, since Gaza was under siege in 2006, we've had numerous strikes, numerous attacks, numerous genocides. But this time, I would claim that the Zionist narrative on world media platforms has been absolutely debunked. Some of my friends who are producers in the BBC or Sky or other channels, they tell me that they are struggling to find anyone who would come on screen and defend Israel outside, a core of about 8, 9, the Israeli ambassador being one of them, or the spokesman of the Israeli army being another. Outside of that particular bunch, no one would be willing to come on screen and defend Israel. They're struggling. And that tells me that This is absolutely unique, and the reaction to this is absolutely unique.
Speaking of mainstream media and Western politicians, why do you think they've been so hesitant and reluctant to call out the genocide for what it is?
They would lose their standing amid the halls of power. The owners, very few, of 90% of media outlets are essentially tied with what seems to be an umbilical cord to the Zionist project, to Israel specifically. The price that they will pay is hefty. Mm-hmm. And when values are diminished, when values are sort of distilled in a way and demeaned, it's a matter of not only survival, but the attainment of power and authority, the material power and authority. We live in a skewed world, my dear brother, and I think that this is a symptom of what we suffer today, whether we're talking about governments. I mean, how on earth can a government that claims to its own citizens that it holds democracy and freedoms and women's rights and children's rights, and continues to pursue that line, yet when it comes to Gaza, actually prosecutes anyone who speaks of those crimes being committed? How can they, look themselves in the mirror, if you wish? But the fact is that we live in a world that is so skewed, so out of keel. So double standards don't mean anything anymore. Hypocrisy doesn't mean anything anymore. It's actually quite a smart trick now to lie, to fabricate. And unfortunately, the media is just a sideshow. It's a prop for the kind of world order that we have today. And that's why I am amongst many, and I think a growing crop of people, and by the way, including non-Muslims, who are saying that this system is debunked, it doesn't work anymore. We need something else.
1 year on into this genocide that we are seeing, it feels at times as there is no end in sight. Mm. Do you see an end to this in the foreseeable future?
I pray every day that I wake up and the killing has stopped. I pray every day that the shelling has ceased. I pray every day that people's lives are saved. But if you were to ask me, and I would respond truthfully, I don't see an end in sight, simply because in my view and my understanding of the Zionist psyche, especially the Netanyahu and co psyche, it's like a dog with a bone. They now see the potential to realize their ultimate dream, and therefore why should they stop? And if before international pressure meant something, now it doesn't. If before world opinion about Israel and the Zionist project mattered, now it doesn't. And so many red lines have been crossed that it doesn't matter anymore. And therefore, unfortunately, I would have to say that I don't see any resolution that would save the lives of Gazans or Lebanese or the such in the near future.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, but we must ask the question, what does the road towards freedom for the Palestinian people look like?
I can answer as a politician, and I can answer as a Muslim. And as a politician, I would say that there needs to be a seismic shift in world order. Now that's probably a little bit ironic, because Netanyahu himself is talking about a different world order. But what he's talking about and what I'm alluding to are two different things, absolutely. I'm talking about the world that we live in today is a world based on materialism, is based on false premise, is based essentially on the fabrication and lies of powerful people. Liberalism has brought nothing but misery to humanity. Capitalism has failed to achieve not even an iota of the dreams that accompanied the project as it was heralded. There are far more wars in the world than there ever was, despite the technological, medical research advancements. Far more people in the world suffer from depression and mental illness. Far more people in the world suffer from poverty, including in super rich countries. We have more and more people joining the billionaire club, with hundreds of millions joining the poverty line every single day. And there is no way out. That needs to be changed for issues such as Palestine. And let's not forget, whilst we had been focused on Palestine for the past year, there's been a genocide going on in Sudan. There's been, for now, 76, 77 years in Kashmir. The Uyghurs, the Rohingya. You know, we could list a whole volume of catastrophes that humanity, not only Muslims, maybe majorly Muslims, but not only Muslims, are suffering from because of the world order. This needs to be changed in order then to actually radically, profoundly bring a resolution to these cases. From a Muslim point of view, I see this as something that we have to endure, we have to be patient. This is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Palestinians are already there on the front line. They are paying the price. May Allah accept their martyrs. May Allah heal their wounded. May Allah give solace and stability and resolution to those who remain. It's us who are being tested, I have to say. Every single day, I ask myself, and I invite those around me to ask themselves, have they done enough? Have they done what it takes, what it needs, what it requires? It's a path that we need to tread, we must tread. We know that the resolution we've been told and we absolutely believe is ours, and for truth and haqq to prevail. But in order to get there, there needs to be much testing, much tribulation, and we only ask Allah that we pass this test and that we emerge on the other side amongst the righteous.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate the suffering of the Muslims worldwide and deal with the oppressors as He deals with them, inshallah. Dr. Altikriti, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure, akhi. Jazakallah khair.